nation's officers of the Axis powers. It begins to look as if Stalin and Hitler will divide the world. On June 22nd, frustrated by his inability to conquer England and not trusting Stalin, Hitler turns his forces on the Soviet Union. Because Stalin had feared to provoke the Germans, he ignored warnings of a Nazi buildup along his border. Caught completely by surprise, poorly led, and lacking the will to fight, the Soviet armies are decimated. Conveniently ignoring his own treacherous acts, Stalin appeals to the West for aid. Weeks later, he justifies his pact with Hitler to the Russian people in this way.
С такими вероломными людьми и извергами, как Гитлер и Риббентроп, не была ли здесь допущена со стороны советского правительства ошибка? Конечно, нет. Пакт о ненападении есть пакт о мире между двумя государствами. Именно такой пакт предложила нам Германия в 1939 году. Могло ли советское правительство отказаться от такого предложения? Я думаю, что ни одно миролюбивое государство не может отказаться от мирного соглашения с соседней державой. Если в этой державе стоят даже такие изверги и людоеды, как Гитлер и Риббентроп. Что выиграла и что проиграла фашистская Германия, вероломно разорвав пакт и совершив нападение на СССР?
But in these early days of the war, many Russians are confused as to exactly who the fiends and cannibals are. In village after village, the Germans are welcomed as liberators, freeing the Russians from the communist yoke. But then comes the incredible barbarism of the Nazi occupation troops. Some people have difficulty drawing a parallel between the brutality of Nazism and the brutality of communism. The victims had no such difficulty. These atrocities and Stalin's appeal to nationalism rather than to communism gives the Soviets a reason to resist, aided by some $11 billion worth of material from the United States. Stalin signs treaties to gain strength, first with the Polish government in exile represented by General Sikorski. Then with the Czechoslovakian government in exile in the presence of his president Beneš. These are just two of the more than 200 treaties and international agreements communists sign and break. General Sikorski, with the Duke of Windsor representing Great Britain watching, takes charge of the Poles on Russian soil. General Svoboda assumes command of the Czechoslovaks. As the war continues, Stalin becomes Uncle Joe, the faithful ally. With a straight face, he signs a summit agreement which states, "We look to the day when all peoples may live free lives, untouched by tyranny and according to their varying desires and their own consciences." But in Moscow, he has already established the Lublin Committee, dedicated to a communist Poland after the war. Soviet diplomacy. Words are one thing, actions another. While the Russian soldier battles Hitler, his communist leaders fight against freedom. In 1944, they unaccountably halt the Red Advance a few miles from Warsaw, where Polish resistance forces have risen in rebellion against the Nazi occupation. "Help us or we die," begged the patriots over the Warsaw radio. But the Red Army stands by, waiting for the future leaders of a free Poland, 200,000 of them to be massacred. and only then do the Reds move in. Stalin takes advantage of the change in the tide of war to satisfy his vengeance on 7 of his minority nations whose members may have been disloyal to him. He directs a mass genocide resulting in over 11 million victims. For example, these Tanu-Tuvinians, a proud and ancient people, completely obliterated, their very existence denied by the Soviet Union. When the war ends, the communists occupy all of Eastern Europe and 1/3 of Germany. Stalin means to hold his gains. All Red-occupied territories are ruthlessly plundered. The example of Mukden, Manchuria, where after 6 months of Red liberation, 5,000 factories are stripped of machinery for removal to Russia. The truth behind Khrushchev's statement, "We categorically refuse all that rests on loot, violence, and occupation." Stalin again signs treaties, this one with Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese nationalist representative. As this scene is being enacted, Stalin is secretly supporting the communist leader Mao Tse-tung. Soviet diplomacy. Meanwhile, Special United States Ambassador George C. Marshall attempts to restore peace in China. He negotiates a truce between the nationalist government forces represented by General Chang Chun and the communist guerrillas represented by General Chou Enlai. Paper promises, and the Reds gain valuable time to strengthen their forces. When Marshall leaves, they resume the war on a vastly larger scale. By the end of 1949, China falls to the Reds. Another 700 million people under communist control. Lenin once said, "We shall reach Paris by way of Peking." During this time, 1945 to 49, Stalin has been beating the propaganda drums for disarmament. But his true policy is revealed in instructions given by the Communist International apparatus. The disarmament policy of the Soviet government must be utilized to support the only way toward abolition of war, arming the communists, overthrowing the capitalists, and establishing the communist dictatorship. Stalin's policy of a protracted conflict, the Cold War, is becoming evident. With about 5 million Red Army troops and 2 million internal security police in East Europe, no one punishes Stalin as he consolidates his control by tearing up previous treaties and signing new ones with his puppets. Romania's Dr. Groza and Dej, East Germany's Grotwald and Peak, Yugoslavia's Tito, Albania's Hodza, in most communist parades and rallies, it's not unusual for the dove of peace to go hand in hand with the reality of war. Bulgaria's Dimitrov, formerly head of the Communist International. Poland's Beirut. Hungary's Rákosi, who speaks of Soviet generosity. Without the unremitting kind support of the Soviet Union, the Hungarian popular democracy, and I may add all other popular democracies, would never have been created. Czechoslovakia's Gottwald. The Czechoslovakian story, a good example of subversion in action. The great liberal statesman Eduard Beneš, after 7 years of wartime exile, is unanimously elected president of the Second Czechoslovak Republic by the Constituent Assembly. But the communists, a militant handful, force the formation of a coalition government and proceed to split and then wreck the opposition. To emerge the leading party in the cabinet under Premier Gottwald. A meeting of the communist dominant Reds infiltrate the army and the trade unions. Gottwald denounces the anti-communist members of his cabinet. Zapotetsky, chairman of the General Confederation of Labor, demands a general strike. The delegates vote. 2 committee members have the courage to abstain. Work stops. Czechoslovakia is paralyzed. Freedom dies as Beneš is forced to accept the resignation of the last anti-communist in the cabinet. And then he too resigns. Foreign Minister Jan Masaryk, a great patriot, still has illusions.
It's up to us, the so-called little people, and I personally proudly claim membership in that great mass of thinking and working citizenry. Come along with us, join us. Let's criticize together. Let's make suggestions together. Let's insist on being heard, and actions are bound to follow. Truth shall conquer if we give it half a chance. I'll be seeing you.
2 weeks after the takeover of Czechoslovakia, Masaryk is dead, allegedly a suicide. Beneš, who also thought he could do business with the communists, dies soon afterward. To divert attention from his next move, Stalin orders violence in South America. In Bogota, Colombia, Dr. Jorge Gatlin, Colombia's most popular political leader, is murdered. Communist handbills printed in advance blamed the murder on the government. Within 24 hours, 1,000 dead, 136 major buildings destroyed, the result of the communist-incited riot. Unexpectedly, Stalin blocks Allied access routes to Berlin. The flood of refugees fleeing from communism embarrasses him. Stalin conveniently puts aside his solemn promise during World War II for free access to the city. This time, however, the United States stands firm. Thousands of tons of food and supplies are flown into Berlin every day. Stalin is made aware that interference means war. He backs down. The roads are reopened. Mao Tse-tung arrives in Moscow to participate in Stalin's 70th birthday celebration, December 2nd, 1949. The new Moscow-Peking axis poses an ever more ominous threat to the free world. The communist narrator translates.
The most vital tasks at the present time are to fight the warmongers, strengthen good neighborly relations between the two great states, China and the Soviet Union, and thanks particularly to the correct international policy of Generalissimo Stalin. In the Presidium are leaders of the party and government, representatives of the various Soviet republics, and of the Communist and Workers' parties abroad.
Khrushchev proudly proclaims Stalin the genius, leader, teacher, father of the nationalities, great industrializer, great collectivizer, creator of Soviet culture, careful gardener tenderly rearing the human beings in his charge. Nikolai Zvernik makes the introductory speech. To his left are Georgy Malenkov, first secretary of the Central Committee, and Lavrenti Beria, Stalin's Minister of Interior and State Security. Next to Stalin are Mao Tse-tung, Walter Ulbricht, Deputy Prime Minister of East Germany, and in a place of prominence, Nikita Khrushchev. In preparation for his next move, Stalin steps up the clamor for peace throughout the world. A rash of peace demonstrations breaks out. This is one of them. The communist narrator says,
on Berlin's Marx-Engels Square, the German youth demonstrate in defense of peace against the remilitarization of Western Germany. The German youth is greeted by the delegates to the World Youth Festival, representing 101 countries. Among those marching are 35,000 young peace champions from Western Germany who managed to get through Adenauer's police cordon. 2 million persons take part in the